Good morning. Everybody have fun last night? Yeah. I did too. So the two most common questions that I get are when's the next release and what's in it? And by the end of this session, you'll know what's coming at the end of November with 2019 R2. But we're also going to talk about our product vision and how our product vision translates into our roadmap and our product priorities for the next 2 years. So I'm really excited to talk about some new capabilities like extrusions and composites, as well as to talk about how we're innovating and collaborating to accelerate additional new capabilities for you. A lot of the theme has been around innovating and collaborating over the course of the conference. And part of our collaboration is our collaboration with you to really help shape our priorities, to define our new capabilities. And venues like this are so helpful to us for getting feedback from you, learning what's going well, where the challenges are, where we can improve our product. Collaboration comes in a lot of different formats for us. It comes in the RFEs that our end users are filing or our project leads. It comes from quarterly business review discussions and executive roadmap reviews where we're doing business alignment around our company directions. So we appreciate all of the feedback and the ongoing collaboration. It also comes from our user council. We'll be hearing from Heath Wall later, who's the president of the user council. It's a group, if you're not familiar with the user council, it's a group of our customers. It's a customer-driven forum that's focused and committed to sharing best practices with each other on the application of product cost management within their organizations, and also to collectively advocate for new capabilities within aPriori. So our product strategy is around enabling the use of product cost management over the entire product lifecycle, starting with before engineering, but focused on engineering and cost engineering, project leads, managers, looking at the unique needs of each of the individuals who are needing to use cost information to make product development decisions, and also how these individuals are working together. We, both within their organization and collaborating with the supply base. So we established about 2 years ago a set of guiding principles that are driving our roadmap. And these have been consistent in our priorities for the last 24 months, and they'll also guide us going forward. Delivering role-based applications, supporting secure collaboration, extending automation and integration, advancing our design for manufacturability feedback and the information that we're presenting to help customers use the data, providing deployment options, and ultimately accelerating time to value, making aPriori easier to stand up and maintain. So let's take a look at these guiding principles and some of the things that we've recently added to the product to support these principles, as well as where we're headed. So delivering role-based applications, this was an approach that we started 2 years ago, looking at our unique constituents, the design engineer, sourcing, the manager, project leads, and looking at what their unique needs are. Our first role-based application was launched in March of last year in our cloud solution, Cost Insight Design. It's a simplified user experience for the design engineer so that they can interact with cost and manufacturability feedback relative to what they can control, which is the geometry and the material of the part. As we look forward, we're going to be adding more to our role-based applications. Our next application is Cost Insight Source, which we're doing R&D for, and we'll be launching next year. Part of our focus on the design engineer was really about increasing our design for manufacturability feedback. In 2017, we extended our cost model so that we could serve up manufacturability feedback. A lot of the manufacturing analysis was occurring in our simulations, but we extended how we store and present the data to help it be more actionable for the end user. And when we introduced the manufacturability guidance, a lot of our end users said, yeah, that's great, but we also want to be able to find outliers or know when we're pressed for time where to focus. So in 2019, we also launched dashboards and reporting so you can do analysis of DTC outliers across a group of parts. As we look forward, we're going to be extending the commodities that we're supporting with DTC. So right now we support casting, plastics, machining, and sheet metal. And we'll be extending that for all of the commodities. And as we add new cost models, we'll be extending that as well. So with DTC and finding outliers and digging in, that often drives a lot of collaboration. So we added some functionality to support tactical collaboration in an organization. So if a design engineer sees an exception, they can assign a scenario to a cost engineer to get some questions and feedback, have them comment that, and send it back. We've also added reports so that if a design engineer is generating an estimate and they're going to hand that off to sourcing, the sourcing person can understand all of the details and assumptions that went into that estimate so they can feel more confident using it in conversations with their supply base. As we move forward, we're going to be adding more capabilities to permission data to enable secure collaboration, and it could be on a scenario, it could be on a VPE. So imagine you're working on a part and you want some feedback from someone who maybe doesn't typically use aPriori, or you want to just give them permission to look at a part. Some of our more granular security will enable this in the future. So you could request input. That person could click on a link, open it up, see the part, comment it, and then you'd be able to get that feedback. This is also a type of permissions that we can use to assign permissions to VPEs. I was talking to a supplier last night on the boat who was mentioning that they really have a vision that over time they begin to share their VPE with their core customers and potential new customers. So this type of permission would enable the supplier to share certain VPEs with certain other end users. So part of what we've been working on under the covers is a lot of automation and integration. We've been driving additional automated costing within our Cost Insight engine, and also integrating with other systems. So we've heard from Stephanie, and we'll be hearing from the Autodesk team a little later this morning about an integration that we did with Fusion 360's generative design. So for early concepting before you start the product design, we integrated to provide cost feedback into that step. We also, in August, launched a partnership and an integration with Silicon Expert. Silicon Expert, if you're not familiar with it, is one of the world's largest databases of electronic components. So imagine if you're costing a PCBA or a wire harness and you want to get the latest costs for certain components, or you need attribute information to use for assembly analysis. The integration allows for a real-time lookup of components within a bill of material and bringing that down into your cost analysis. So Pat talked about yesterday, Pat and David, early viz DFMC. So integrating more tightly into engineering processes so that costing is happening early on automatically and alerting the end user. So creating new paradigms for costing. A lot of the infrastructure that we're working on right now is going to support that. So a couple years ago, we heard from our project leads, we need to make aPriori easier to deploy. We need to make it easier to get aPriori out to lots of engineering desktops and making upgrades easier. So in March, when we launched our cloud solution, we committed to providing different deployment options and your choice of whether you use aPriori on-premise or aPriori in the cloud. Just to recap our cloud solution, so Cost Insight Design is our first web-based costing application. It's available in the cloud, as is aPriori Professional streamed through a streaming service through Amazon, and our reporting solution, Cost Insight Report. So you have the choice of using our cloud solution or our on-premise solution. Our cloud solution is based on the AWS platform, which is a very secure and scalable platform, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. As we look forward, whether you're using aPriori on-premise or whether you're using it in the cloud, we're working on tools to make it easier for you to set up and manage your deployment, making it easier to manage users, to set up permissions for those users to be able to manage and maintain your VPEs. A lot of what we're working on is related to accelerating time to value. But specifically when we talk about time to value, we're focused on how do we make it easier to install and get aPriori up and running, and how do we make it easier for you to upgrade. Back in 2018, we got clear feedback from the user council. We needed to make Cost Insight Report easier to install. There were some challenges on installing it, which often slowed down upgrades. So in 2019 R1, we launched an installer for Cost Insight Report. We also got feedback from our customers that they wanted to be able to install aPriori Professional and carry forward the settings. So when you're upgrading and you're moving from one release to the next, things like memory settings and user preferences, not having to reset those each time. Those are some of the enhancements that are going into the product with 2019 R2. We also introduced an upgrade tool, a cost model upgrade tool. This is used by our services organization to help you upgrade your cost models to new cost model versions and take advantage of the new capabilities they were introducing. We're going to make this also available on a limited basis to customers who are using the cost model workbench for building and their own cost models. So there's more to come on this accelerating time to value. And one focus of us is streamlining the data in a VPE and looking at the data across the process groups. Our goal is to consolidate the data so that there's not replication, so where you have to do maintenance and change values, you do it once and it applies to all of the processes of where that data applies. And we're also working on new tooling, so for the most common configurations like adding a secondary process or configuring a routing, making that a much more visual and easier process within the tool. Here's an example of how we've added more transparency and how we're streamlining the data. So all of our wage rates within our VPEs are based off a series of 9 wage grades per region. We have wage grades for plastic processes and wage grades for sheet metal processes. We're now providing transparency into each one of those wage grades, and then we're mapping it to the machines. So from your perspective in your deployment, you could change the mapping and still continue to inherit the data. So you could say, I'm working in an area where I use a higher skilled laborer than your baselines for 3-axis milling. I'm going to change that wage grade. Or maybe you actually want to change the value of what that labor rate is. You'll be able to do that in one place for a regional VPE, and then that will extend to all the processes within that VPE that use that wage grade. Okay, so now let's take a look at a little bit more detail on our cost models and our roadmap. Our roadmap is broken into 3 key areas. It's our cost models and data and our VPE tooling, our end user functionality, and then the enterprise capabilities that support our global users. So we're going to take a look at the cost models first. So what are we building and how are we prioritizing? Well, we're building so we can cost more of the products that you make. And we have customers in aerospace and defense. We have industrial equipment in many different segments of industrial equipment, high tech, consumer products, automotive, trucking, car makers, recreational vehicles. So here's our focus on how do we extend our manufacturing cost models to better support what you're making and costing more of your products. Last year, we launched 6 new primary processes in additive manufacturing, plastics, and metal forming. We added 11 new secondary operations. We did a lot of enhancements to plastics, machining, casting. You're going to continue to see both new capabilities as well as refinements to existing cost models. So, all right, this is our first quiz of the day. Do you know what these components have in common? Extrusions, that's right. So I'm going to invite Karen Gold up here. Karen Gold is our product manager responsible for a lot of our core IP, our cost engine, a lot of our cost models, composites, extrusions, machining, sheet metal, the list goes on. Karen's going to tell us a little bit about extrusions.
Thanks, Julie. I'm very excited that I actually got to lead the team that developed the extrusions cost model because it is one of our most requested costing capabilities, if not the most. We have over 50 enhancement requests in our enhancement database from over 50 customers, and we've received hundreds of sample parts from customers who are requesting this capability. So it's been great support from you guys. We really appreciate that. So we are introducing support. It's coming in the 2019 R2 release. And our target is supporting both straight and bent extrusions. For example, in the automotive picture you see up there, you see a wide range of part types, from the large profile but straight seat back breast to some of the beams in the frame system. Extrusions are really used extensively in all the industries that our customers belong to, and so that really explains the demand for this cost model. So our approach to implementing support for this cost model is, our goal was to support what we call light to moderately machined extrusions in this initial release. And our intent was to support both modeling the extrusion process itself, determining the process material and tooling cost, and adding support for both straight and bent extrusion parts. In addition, a lot of the cost of these parts is actually due to the secondary material removal. So we extended our capabilities in that area. We've introduced GCDs that better characterize the material that's been removed from the extrusion, and also supplemented the material removal and machining operations that are available for custom extrusion profiles. Our approach to implementing this cost model was to make it available inside our existing bar and tube fabrication process group, but it does require a separate license. So if you have the existing bar and tube process group today, you can continue to use it to cost a commodity stock forms like a round bar, round tube, angle bar, and so forth. But if you're costing custom extrusion profiles, that does require additional credits. Guidance in terms, sorry, one more thing. Guidance in terms of the part types it supports. Like I said, our target was light to moderately machined extrusions. We also have some customers who have very heavily machined extrusions, in particular parts that are made from custom extrusion profiles, but really more from a material utilization motivation standpoint, not the finished part actually has no profile of the original extrusion remaining. It's all been machined away. So for those types of parts, you can cost them, but you'll want to use an approach where you use the extrusions cost model combined with two-model machining to get both the cost of the extrusion profile and the finished part.
Thanks, Karen. All right, are you ready for round two? So what do these components have in common? Composites, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. So we actually had our presentation on this yesterday, so thanks to those of you who attended. We are also releasing support for composite parts in the fall release. And our initial target was the aerospace industry and the part types and processes that are common there. So the parts we see on this screen, parts made from solid laminates, frames, and stringers, and parts made from the with core reinforced panels is our target. Integrated structures, the picture on the right that you see there, we won't initially support in our fall release because they're really sort of an assembly level process that requires co-curing, but we do expect to support that in the future. And we're really looking for your input in terms of some of the direction we take there. The three processes that will be supported, the layup processes that will be supported in this initial release, are hand layup, which involve cutting plies out of large rolls of pre-preg material, and automated tape layup, which uses sort of typically 6-inch to 12-inch wide rolls of tape, and the automated fiber placement process, which uses a very narrow rolls of tape, 1/8 of an inch wide down to even 1/32 of an inch. So those are the three processes that we'll have in our baseline process group, and we are looking forward to input from you about future processes of interest.
Thanks, Karen. So if you're interested in learning more about extrusions, join the deep dive, the commodity deep dive later this morning
That's at 11
on
o'clock.
extrusions.
Thank you.
Great. Hand that to Mark. So in addition to new costing capabilities, we've also made some enhancements across that impact all of our cost models. So I want to invite Mark up here, Mark Dignam. Many of you know Mark. He's responsible for our additive cost models, our electronics cost models. He focuses on our RDLs, and he also focuses a lot on the design engineer to talk about some of these enhancements that we've made.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Julie. So sorry we don't have any exciting quizzes or as many exciting pictures, but we do have some exciting enhancements that really span all of our cost models to talk about. The first one is within 2019 R2 across all process groups, we will be supporting material buyback or scrap buyback. So previously, the way that our material calculations work is, we calculated utilization, and we were assuming that anything that was scrap material, whether it be material utilization or downstream scrap parts from failed inspections or just scrapped within a secondary process like machining, those were thrown out and there was no buyback accounted for. But now within all of our cost models, we'll be accounting for both the scrap buyback during the primary utilization process, as well as any scrap buyback from parts that are scrapped later down in the processing of that component. So that's one of the major enhancements that we have across all of our process groups. And then the other is for all of our processes that support hard tooling, like injection molding, like stamping, like casting. Previously, we've heard a lot of feedback that, hey, our tooling calculations are very, very useful, but we're making hundreds of thousands or millions of these over the lifetime of the part, and that tool is going to wear out over time. So aPriori, how can you help me account for the fact that I'm going to need to buy 2, 3, 4 of these tools in order to manufacture the entire production volume of this part? So we've added in 2019 R2 the ability to account for the purchasing of multiple tools, and that's going to be dependent on many different things, which is going to vary by process group, but things like the tooling material that you're using, obviously the production volume of your part, as well as things like the coating of the tool and the material of the part itself, since all of those things are going to impact how quickly a tool is actually going to wear out, and therefore how many of them you need to actually buy up front. And then the last thing that we've done is really probably going to ring most true to people that work in cost model workbench, but it also is a huge benefit to everybody in that we've put together a very large effort to reduce the redundancy of the code that we use within our cost models, specifically within machining operations, which those of you that work in machining know that there are hundreds to thousands of individual operations. So what we've done is we've moved a lot of those individual calculations that happen on each operation and centralize them so that if you need to make updates to the logic, you can do it in one single place, making configuring of those much easier if you're a cost model workbench user. And then also for us, it means that we can move a lot faster when we need to make updates and make our base product better. So it means for everybody, you're going to get better cost models delivered more quickly. And we've made a similar effort across all of our cost models for our standard logic. Things like our cost logic and our cycle time, labor time logic. That is, generally the formulas are pretty similar across all the process groups. So we've standardized those, centralized those, put them in one location so that it's easier to add processes if you're configuring, easier for us to add processes. So it will enable us to start to move much more quickly, speaking to the accelerate time to value principle that we have. And so that's everything that I had today. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for joining us. So a couple other things I want to talk about as to where our priorities are from a cost modeling perspective as we look beyond 19.2 into 2020. So we'll be extending our cost models for providing design to cost feedback in all of our commodity areas. We've gotten a lot of requests for this in additive manufacturing, stamping, bar and tube. So you'll be seeing more of this in coming releases. We've also, we're undergoing research right now on high production volume machining practices and how we extend our existing machining modules for when you're making very high volumes of parts. A lot of our automotive customers have given us some feedback and have made requests on being able to drive more high volume practices within machining. We're also extending our stamping and our forming capabilities, making some enhancements to transfer die and stage tooling, as well as introducing new cost models like hot stamping. To complement our electronics cost modules, now we support wire harness and printed circuit board assembly. We'll also be adding a cost model for the fabrication of the printed circuit board itself. Today, that's taken as an input into the analysis. So we'll be introducing a cost model to both cost the board as well as to do the assembly on the printed circuit board to make the final assembly. And this release, we did research on investment casting. This is a enhancement request that we've got across a lot of our industries. There's been some configuration to do some estimation on this with existing cost models. We'll be launching an investment casting cost model. So we talked a lot about accelerating time to value. Mark told us a little bit about what we're doing on cost models to streamline the code to make it easier to configure. We're going to be continuing that theme. In 2019 R2, as I mentioned earlier, we're consolidating the labor wages. As we look forward, we'll be consolidating all of our data so that we have master machine tables and master material tables that can be used by different process groups, and being able to adjust data but continue to still take trend data from the aPriori regional data libraries to streamline the maintenance process for you. We've also gotten some requests from VPE managers and project leads for advice on how to track what needs to be maintained in their VPE. And so what we'll be launching is a series of reports so that a VPE manager and a project lead can track where overrides are going in scenarios and use that as a guide to determine where there may need to be edits to VPEs. So if someone's continually updating the labor rate on a per scenario basis, that may be a flag that the labor rate in the VPE needs to be updated. From a new capability adoption perspective, we've been working on the installers, making the aPriori easier to install, carrying settings over from release to release when you're upgrading. We've also introduced a set of standardized reports. So when you're going from release to release, one area that we've gotten feedback on is while you're validating the capabilities, while you're checking that your VPEs are performing as you expected, that can often take a lot of time, and there's a lot of back and forth. We've created a series of reports so that you can cost a set of parts in your existing production release, those same set of parts in your test environment for your new version, do a quick comparison, and we automatically flag where there's differences. Barton had talked about this yesterday in the upgrade session, and we'll be doing more education and training on this as we go to launch 2019 R2, and that becomes available. We're also, with our cost model upgrade tool, which we launched for our services team to accelerate doing cost model upgrades within VPEs for customers, we are making this available on a limited basis to customers who are building their own VPEs. We know there are some of you who are doing a lot of configuration within Cost Model Workbench and doing your own upgrades. This is something that we can show you how to use in your environment. One of the things that we'll also be extending is our internationalization and localization. Our next area of focus is around our cost models and the messages that our cost models produce, localizing those, supporting foreign language support. With the upgrade tool, I do want to point out that we're predicting, based on some early use, that we can simplify the upgrades of VPEs and make it about 40% faster. So easier VPE deployments. Earlier, Mark was talking about how we made some changes to use standard cycle time calculations in all processes within a VPE. We're also going to be doing that for the cost taxonomy. So if you want to roll up costs in a specific way, you establish that cost taxonomy at the top level within your VPE, and then all the processes within that cost model adhere to that. We're working on, in 2021, we'll be launching a new application for simplifying common configurations. And right now we're tracking industry profiles for common settings, common practices, and in future releases we'll be evaluating, creating starting points that are a combination of our regional data libraries, our manufacturing cost models, plus additional settings for industry-specific starting points. So from here, I'm going to transition to our solutions, a combination of our end-user functionality and our enterprise infrastructure to support your users around the globe. It's really common that most of our customers have multiple locations where the users are working. Often it's multiple countries, multiple continents, and that performance and security are really critical to enabling the solution within your environment. So our key constituents are the design engineer, the manager, the cost expert, sourcing, and supplier quoting. A big part of our focus has been on how we support aggregate analysis for design engineers and for managers to track project status and to find insights in groups of parts. I'm going to invite Pat up here. Pat is, as you know, our product manager responsible for Cost Insight Report, and he focuses a lot on our infrastructure capabilities to support our solutions. To talk a little bit about what's coming in reporting.
Great, thank you, Julie. I noticed you're, I should do the next slide. I noticed that you're running ahead of time, so I thought I'd tell a little story.
I know you're full of surprises, Pat.
All right, well, it's not that much a surprise, but I got here at noontime on Monday and immediately jumped into a Cost Insight training class, which was great. In a small room in the basement, which I'm used to being in. It was only set up for about 15 people, and we put 20 people in there. Later in the day, I sat in a presentation by Abe Chavis on risk management for supplier risk, managing supplier risk, and it was all about using reporting to manage that risk. It was a great presentation, great use case for reporting, and it was great to see. About 50, 60 people in, and he did that presentation twice. And then in the afternoon, Mackenzie Merrick, along with, who's from aPriori, and along with John Allen from Jabil, gave a great presentation on DTC metrics. And it was great on the DTC side. One of the things that was very interesting for me to hear about John's sort of journey into using Cost Insight, which, you think about the presentation yesterday about laggards and early adopters and things like that. And I do not think of John as a laggard. I worked with John about 5 years ago to implement access control at his previous company. I think he was customer number 2 on access control, so he's not a laggard, but he was taking his time getting into Cost Insight, and he admitted that. And then he said, well, the way I got into it is got Cost Insight installed, and I just started using the activity reports. I wanted to get a handle on my deployment, see who was costing what. Then he started looking at these scenario activity reports that give you an idea of what VPEs are being used, which process group, processes, materials. And that was his introduction. It doesn't take a lot of effort, you're just running things. And then DTC was really the thing that I think hooked John, because he had a problem to solve. He had all these parts, he couldn't figure out where to start, and the DTC reports really gave him an opportunity to understand that. And then he just started spending lunch hours doing ad hoc reporting, and he's telling me about the next set of things he's doing. He's working with expert services, he's pulling out custom outputs to get at really detailed things that he needs to do to make himself more successful. So that, I think, was a great story for me to see. And now everybody's path is going to be different. But I do think John's is a very normal kind of path. Start with those activity reports, just get a handle, get familiar. And I do think DTC, to me, is sort of the, I think, going to be the killer app for a Cost Insight report, because we spent the last year, and that's really where our focus was, getting that great manufacturability usage into the reporting environment. And we do it in a little bit of a different way. When you're using aPRO or Cost Insight design, you can say, well, a bend 26, on this planar face. You can see all these things that are going wrong in these holes, and you get very detailed information. What we're trying to do from a reporting perspective is aggregate that up. So at the part level, you're getting counts of manufacturabilities, design issues. And, so those are the kinds of things, and we're not really looking at the individual GCD level. So it makes it easier to look at a part and look at a part in terms of how complex it is from a manufacturability. And then you can roll that up or aggregate those parts into a roll-up, as Julie was mentioning, and now you get an idea of over a set of parts, where they stand. And that's really what the reporting is giving you, that higher level visibility into the places that need work. So what we did were around DTC reporting. Julie mentioned there's 4 process groups, so you got 4 sets of reports. And so for each process group, there's 3 reports. We start off with something that is sort of a cost versus mass with bubbles in them. And the bubbles represent parts, and the bigger you are, the bigger the annual spend is. And then we color them based on their DTC scores. So you're getting lots of information quickly to see where your outliers are. And then you get into a report like the one you see here, which is a comparison report. And this is really how we drive the scoring. We decided for each process group, so that's really the only difference between the process groups are the metrics we're using on these charts to drive the sort of DTC score. So you can see we have different
There's a couple different buttons.
There we go. So the different metrics that we're using for, and this is machining. And these drive that DCE score. And then you get into the report that I showed yesterday in the Run DMC presentation. You remember the golf sort of leaderboard. So you come into a report that gives you the worst DTC parts from a DTC perspective and the ranking of those. And those are the 3 reports you work with across this. So we tried our best to figure out what the key metrics are for each of the process groups to drive that kind of scoring for you, but they may not be what you want to see. And that's where the ad hoc reporting comes in. And it's very easy. Talk to John and other people who've used it. It's really easy to build these kind of reports. Really, literally in a matter of minutes, you can build reports like this. This is a very simple one. We're just looking at the total count of GCDs divided by the number of issues to give you some sort of sense of, if you think about it, if you had 2 parts that both had, let's say, 30 manufacturing issues on them, and one part had 3,000 GCDs and the other had 30, it tells you something about them, because the counts themselves can be misleading. So you really want to look at sort of ratios, and that's kind of the tricky part of trying to get a scoring that works across all kinds of process groups, but you can't just take counts. So that's a quick report that you can do. I'm pointing the wrong way. These kind of are charts. So if you remember that, the first thing we looked at here was a set of four charts. These are very easy to develop. You can develop the ones that are critical to your processes and the way you do your business, and then you can easily put these kind of charts into a dashboard in the ad hoc tool. Work with our expert services groups if you want some help on this. It's really easy to do. Then, that's it, but
There's more?
the one thing you didn't put on here, last thing, 2019 R2, we put access control in the CI report. And I think that's important. It's been a blocker for, I know, a couple of the customers, because you have access control in aPriori. Wasn't in Cost Insight report, but we put it in there, and I hope that unblocks you.
You're going to go to Karsten.
Karsten.
All right, thanks, Pat. So we've talked a lot about DTC reporting at an aggregate level. In aPriori Professional and Cost Insight Design, we're still focused on expanding the DTC feedback that we're providing on a component level. In both of our Cost Insight Design and aPriori Professional, our DTC guidance is focused on providing visibility into key cost drivers of the part, helping understand the key assumptions and where the costs are coming from within a part. Also surfacing where there's manufacturing issues or potential design standard violations, and working towards not only highlighting issues, but surfacing up information and providing controls for end users to fix and change their part before they move further into the development cycle. So let me talk a little bit more about Cost Insight Design in the cloud. So this is our first web-based cloud app. It's one of the components that's in our cloud solution. With Cost Insight Design, this is a browser-based application. It's accessible from anywhere. An end user logs in through a secure authentication process using a web browser. It collectively uses the feedback that we received from you around simplifying the user experience, focusing on the design engineer, and we're able to use modern toolkits and modern technology frameworks to make it interactive and very visual and simple to use. So I want to invite Karsten up here. Many of you probably attended Karsten's session earlier or yesterday to talk about what's new in the cloud and what's coming in Cost Insight Design. He's going to give a quick update about what's coming in 2019 R2 and then subsequent 2020 releases.
Great. Thank you, Julie. It's hard to follow up a presentation after Pat because I don't have a good story to tell. It was lots of great content to cover in what we've been doing in Cost Insight Design. The screen you see at the top, that screenshot, I think is a good starting point, because we've had a lot of conversations and a lot of discussion this day or during the session about DTC and how much we're doing there. You saw the DTC reports on the Cost Insight report side. So a typical workflow might be that you find the parts that you want to investigate and dig into further, and then you go from there and you connect here to the specific part, and then you have the ability to do some very detailed analysis on that component. So you can, for example, here you have a machined part up on the screen. We have different heat maps that give you indication as to where expensive areas are in the part. So that's a carryover from features that we've had in the desktop for a while, but we've spent a lot of effort in the DTC features in CI design and presentation. So what you'll see in CI design overall is a big effort on progressive display of information. So it walks you through the most important issues first, and then sort of step by step takes you into things that you should also consider. So for example, if there's something that failed completely, there's a bend that couldn't be made, it'll call that out first. But here in this example, there's some cycle time issues that features have high cycle times. Well, maybe it has to be that way, but maybe there's something you can do in the design to improve the costs here. So it's sort of progressive review of DTC guidance. There's guidance for all the different process groups that we support in the desktop. I think there's 5 today: machining, casting, die casting, sand casting, sheet metal, and plastics. And certainly there's a lot of work going on to improve that even further. And it ties, of course, into the same database, and the DTC feedback you see here is what feeds into the reports and what you also see in the desktop product. Aside from that, there's a number of great features as well coming in the cloud. In CI design, we covered a bit of that during the session yesterday. Done a lot of work on assemblies. You can now do load assemblies, work and navigate assemblies, and there's some great new viewer features there that are actually just in the web viewer. There's more control for tolerance and threads. The general theme there is we want to give the designer all the control they need to sort of set the part up to be costed, and then also some more routing controls. So you have the ability to edit that top-level routing or maybe add a secondary process that was missing. And another thing that's been a big request from many of our customers is the cost and aPriori plugin. So we've had plugins for a while on the desktop side. We're now introducing those for the web product, starting with Creo, and then we're moving to NX and then CATIA. So we'll have a Creo plugin with the first major release in a few months, I think 19.2. In 2020, some great projects, more assembly work, more process group support, so 2-model welding, I think some of the ones that we've heard about as the most important ones for the customers, and tighter integration to source to the reporting, and of course to some of the new applications that are coming along as well. And I think there's one more slide that highlights a new feature that we've been prototyping. Some of you might have been at the lab downstairs where Brianna and Thomas were previewing this new sort of guidance that's built into the application. So you have the ability to sort of click this button, and for a new user, it'll walk you right through the application sort of step by step. And then it gives you sort of also tracks sort of how many of these training tutorials you've completed. So it's a great way to just learn the application on your own very quickly and easily. And we can even tailor to the level of experience. So if you're an experienced user, you don't see those walkthroughs because you've already done them only for new users. And so we have different types of guidance we can introduce, and we might throw them in for new features. And there's also very specific sort of feature and DTC guidance we can layer on top of that as well. So very flexible guidance framework that we've added to the product.
Thanks, Karsten. Oh, yeah. So Cost Insight Design is built on our web-based infrastructure, and at the heart of it is our cost engine, our Cost Insight engine, which is interacting with Cost Insight Design. This is the infrastructure that we are supporting to support more automation and integration, to support generative design, design optimization. We heard from the Schlumberger team yesterday about how they're integrating aPriori into design optimization and being able to do cost-value trade-offs in minutes where it typically took weeks. And early viz DFMC from Pat yesterday. The infrastructure in our cloud solution is what's enabling these additional applications of aPriori and enabling different use cases and paradigms where you're able to generate cost differently and integrate with cost differently. So this is what will enable us to automatically cost components, and then rather than having the engineer have to go to the application to see the results, for us to be able to send them summaries of what's been costing and where they may want to look deeper, where there's potential issues, and go right from things like an email summary through to clicking through and seeing where there's places they need to analyze more, and going right into the application to analyze components and be able to make trade-offs and then see in real time the updates to those components. So this type of work is what's enabling these new workflows like Pat had laid out yesterday, where the design engineer is working, they check in their part. Upon check-in, there is a trigger to cost and a priori. Data can then be pushed back into the PLM system. It can be aggregated and sent back to the design engineer. And then there's new usage patterns where the design engineer can go right from reports and emails directly into a priori for areas where they need to explore further. So our direction is role-based applications. This is what we're rolling out in the cloud. So we talked about cost insight design, which is for the design engineer. The cost expert, we're providing a priori professional in the cloud. For the manager, it's cost insight report. Cost insight report will be available in our cloud solution with the November release of a priori 2019 R2. Our first release of 2020 will have our initial capabilities for sourcing, and then following that, we'll be adding a module for supplier quoting. So from a sourcing perspective, we've been doing R&D on where to target the functionality for a sourcing application. And we have gotten feedback from buyers and commodity managers that the most common applications for a priori in sourcing are outlier analysis, quote checking, negotiating bid packages, and that there's significant value that's been generated from using the data from a priori in these activities. But we also receive feedback that we need to make the tool easier for you to use for buyers, and that's what Cost Insight Source will be all about. Being able to make it easier to get quotes into a priori, to aggregate a priori cost analysis, to make it easier to compare against those quotes, and to understand the assumptions to support discussions and collaboration with your suppliers. And then being able to do real-time updates both at a bid package level and see the impact on all the parts within the bid package as well as at a component level. Barton Finney is leading the research on our sourcing application. Thank you. I know many of you participated in our usability lab over the past 2 days to provide feedback into our sourcing application. If you didn't have a chance to sit down with Barton and you're interested in providing input into our sourcing application, please reach out to me or to Barton and we'll set something up and we can have a follow-on session with you. So going forward, we'll continue to offer choice of a priori on-premise and a priori in the cloud, and we'll be extending our capabilities in each of these areas. There's some key enterprise capabilities that I want to make sure I cover. So one was it's around security. So Pat had mentioned on Cost Insight Design or Cost Insight Report that we now support access control on Cost Insight Report. So all of our applications adhere to the data permissions that you're establishing in a priori Pro. So when in a deployment, you're setting up what end users can access, what VPEs, what data that they can access, any of our apps that they're using, those permissions would adhere to them. We've also added new capabilities so that you can create different variants of admins. For some of our large deployments, we got feedback that some admins only do user management and that the organization didn't want all of the administrative functionalities available to that end user. So using access control, you're able to create different types of admins who have different responsibilities, either in building and configuring VPEs or in administrating the system overall. On the cloud front, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about SOC 2. You might not know much about SOC 2, or it might not mean that much to you, but if you determine that you're going to be evaluating cloud within your organization, your IT organization will care about it, and they'll probably be looking for it. SOC 2 is an industry-leading designation that is an audit to certify that a cloud application is secure, it's performant, it has appropriate data privacy, and that there's processing integrity within the application. It's an auditing process. We received our level 1 certification in July, and our level 2 certification is planned at the end of this month. The difference between level 1 and level 2 is that level 1 is at a point in time, and then they track security and performance over a period of time for the level 2 certification. So as we wrap up, we talked about our release strategy. We have a lot planned in new capabilities across end user functionality and cost models. We are releasing 2 major releases per year. We do 4 regional data library updates a year. With every one of our releases, all of our products are compatible with each other. Our end user applications, our cost models, our data libraries, and we're going to be continuing to roll out new capabilities. What I ask of you is to think about our existing capabilities and our planned capabilities now that you have a better sense of what's coming in our roadmap, and to think about how that can impact your deployment and your success plan. If there are capabilities that you see that you want to participate in our R&D, you want to provide test data, maybe give feedback to early releases of the product, or work with us in our development stage, or provide test data, we welcome that input in the development process. Or if there's capabilities that you want to adopt or learn more about, talk to your CSM, and they can work with you to help plan those into your success plan. So we talked a lot about innovating and collaborating and accelerating, and we're very committed to innovating to accelerate new capabilities in the product cost management front to help you. Thank you.